Switch over there.
Our main speaker, Don Weden, is going to be switching his computer, but I just want to tell you a little bit about his background. So Mr. Weden was a principal planner for the comprehensive planning section of the Santa Clara County Planning Office for many years prior to his retirement. During his 34 years with Santa Clara County Planning, he managed a wide array of planning studies, including the last comprehensive revision of the county's general plan. And since his retirement, he's been going around doing presentations and trying to educate the community on what our county and city are going to look like in the next rendition of it. So we'll let him get started.
Yeah, we're warming it up here, we'll be ready to go.
By the way, I've seen Don's presentation once before, and Alan is totally fascinated by it.
I'm always a little leery when somebody says, oh gosh, he's got the funniest stories ever. Well, how do you can't live up to that kind of expectation. But thank you so much for the opportunity to be here this evening and to give you sort of a preview of what's happening on a larger scale in Santa Clara County that may affect your neighborhoods and certainly your city as a whole. Just do one other quick thing here so that if I start talking too slowly or too quietly, for you to signal. Can you hear me back there?
Yes,
okay. One of the things I'm impressed with is the array of projects that your association gets involved with, because I think as a planner, I strongly believe that great cities are made by great neighborhoods. There's no such thing as a great city that doesn't have great neighborhoods. And great neighborhoods are made by people who care about them and improve them and are constantly trying to make them better for themselves and for future generations. So thank you for all that your association does. I'm going to be talking this evening about Santa Clara County 3.0, sort of in software terms. That means the next upgrade of what's going on out here. And I've got a number of slides to go through, so I'm going to start off fairly quickly here with a couple quick announcements. First of all, I'm not here to tell you how to plan your city. I'm not here to say here's what you should do in your neighborhood, here's what should happen in downtown, whatever. Talk about generally what's going on throughout the community, throughout the valley, and how that may impact us more generically. You can apply it then to what works and doesn't work in your particular neighborhood. So maybe looking at it from a countywide perspective with a future orientation. When I retired a couple of years ago, I started thinking I had a little more time to think about longer term into the future. So what I've been doing is looking at about 15 years from now, what might the county be like? How will things be different? And how can we prepare for that? Because normally we're just thinking about today and tomorrow, maybe next week if we're really future oriented. But this is sort of oriented, what will be happening over the next 15 years, roughly between now and 2030 in this county. One of the things I firmly believe is that it's important for us not to sit back and let things just happen to us, but we need to be proactive. We need to take control of our own futures. So I'm going to be offering some suggestions about that, beginning with the following quotations. When it comes to the future, there are three kinds of people. Those who make it happen, those who let it happen, and those who wonder what happened. We can't afford to be those who just wonder what happened. We need to be the ones who make it happen. So I want to give you some insight as to what's going on out there so you can maybe help see how that applies to your neighborhood and to your city. I'm going to begin with a summary up front so you know what the basic messages are. If you have to leave early, you'll have basically gotten the key messages right now. If any of you need to get up and use the restroom or anything during my presentation or leave for other obligations, feel free. Basically what I'm here to tell you about is that obviously places change over time. They're shaped and reshaped by a variety of forces, both internal within the community and external outside. Usually the changes we experience in our cities are fairly gradual. They take place over a number of years. We hardly notice them except in retrospect. I think back, we were talking earlier about what did San Jose Airport look like 15 years ago. That's 15 years worth of change, and that's major. But when it was happening, it seemed wasn't that big a deal. But sometimes, unlike the gradual change, we get periods where suddenly change is just sort of accelerated. It happens more dramatically. And that's when we're entering into a new era in our growth and development, when things are not going back to the way they were. We're going to be changing the fundamental nature of things. And that's what we're doing now from a planning perspective. That's how I see us evolving. And the way I describe it is we are becoming Santa Clara County 3.0, which is becoming an urban-suburban hybrid. I'll explain that a little bit later, but we're no longer just predominantly the suburban communities we've been for the last 50 years. We are becoming more urban, and that has a lot of implications for it, and it's something we can do well or we can do poorly. We've got to learn how to do it well. I would say that at this point, my perception is that most communities are not adequately prepared for this kind of changes. Some of the statistics I will be laying out, I always get sort of awe from the audience. They didn't realize that that was happening. If we don't realize those things are happening, then we aren't preparing for them, is the way I look at it. So I would say at this point, from a planning perspective, will Santa Clara County 3.0 be better or worse than 2.0? I said I don't know yet. It all depends on us, depends on you, depends on us collectively throughout the valley, how we plan the future of our community. I absolutely believe that we can make this a better place, even better place than it has been in the past. But to do that, we're going to have to take advantage of the forces of growth and change and sort of re-examine some of our attitudes and say, well, maybe that's not a negative, maybe if we use that and put it in the right place, it could be a positive contribution to our community. So that's kind of where I'm going with this. Is the world is changing, it's happening fairly dramatically now. We're entering a new era in the county's growth and development. The goals of my presentation this evening are as follows. First of all, to describe some of the forces that cause places to change. It's not just those greedy developers that I sometimes hear. If it weren't for those greedy developers, our neighborhood would stay exactly the way it always has been. Not true. Secondly, to identify some of the major forces that are currently shaping Santa Clara County. And finally, to suggest how we can make Santa Clara County better than 3.0, better than 2.0. Now, when I talk about the evolution of places, I can talk about it at various scales, from individual parcels to the block, all to the world. I'm focusing on the county, on Santa Clara County, and what's happening here. And as I said before, the way it's being shaped and reshaped, or some of it's from internal forces of geography, local politics, history, and so on. But it's also world events and the world economy and conditions in other countries that help to shape and reshape communities. Some of the specific forces that are involved are things like demography, population growth, changes in the composition of the population, the age, and so on. Economic opportunity that draws people to some places. Lack of economic opportunity elsewhere that causes them to want to leave where they are in pursuit of better conditions. Transportation improvements that can make it quicker to get from one place to another. You can take a train rather than a wagon train. You can get across the country a lot faster. And if you had high-speed rail, you get there even faster, supposedly. Communication technology is another thing that has changed the world a lot. We used to have to live fairly close together, work fairly close together, because we were dependent on the mail system to communicate. Well, that's different now for certain. Natural forces like earthquakes excuse me, are another thing. Recall the 1989 earthquake that damaged the Embarcadero Freeway in San Francisco. Well, what has replaced a beautiful park that's open to the public? It's something that old freeway just didn't provide. So natural disasters can change places. Things as mundane as technology such as a home air conditioner can make a difference. Imagine what the population of Arizona would be today if it hadn't been for the air conditioner. There may be 7 people living in that whole state. 8 tops is my best guess. Changes in local economy. We were once an agricultural economy here predominantly. Became in the early days of making silicon chips, and now we make all sorts of products and services, and almost impossible to describe in just a few words the nature of our economy. That can change how the community grows. Well, Google downtown. I don't need to say any more than to make that point that changes in the local economy can also bring about changes in the physical shape of the county, the form of the county. Another thing we need to recognize is that land use economic forces are always sort of in play. And when there's a place that people still want to live and still want to add businesses to and so on, and want to move to, and the land gets filled out, the land prices go up, and the reaction from the market is we build higher and denser. That's true sort of universally. Finally, there are forces that have become more involved in the last couple of years. In particular, state government used to sort of largely keep its hands off of local land use planning. But as we're dealing with particularly the housing crisis in the state is saying we can't leave it just up to the local governments because they aren't addressing the problem adequately. So we'll see in a few minutes some of the things that they're doing to step in and change in ways that will help will cause our community to become more urban in some places. So when you kind of look at these in summary, going from what the valley looked like back in the 1860s to what it looks like today, all of these things, demography, economy, geography, et cetera, are shaping and reshaping our valley and have been throughout history, much of history. Rather than continue to recite that long list of things, I've sort of, my shorthand is that those are the winds of change. They're constantly blowing. Most of the time they're blowing gently. And as I said before, change occurs fairly gradually, and we hardly even notice it. And when that's happening, we don't really need to change our lives much or the way we plan our communities much because the world isn't changing very much. So it's all pretty gradual, almost something we don't have to pay attention to. But sometimes those winds of change start blowing more dramatically. And when that happens, the rate and the magnitude of change is accelerated and increased in magnitude. And when that's happening, we can't afford just to say, well, let's just wait until things turn back to normal, because they probably aren't going to come back to normal. We have to adjust to the world as it's going to be, not necessarily as it has been. So that's when we need to bring in Robert Redford, I think was in this movie. Somebody like him anyway, to help us make the major changes that are necessary. I've got some slides here. That's some actors, and maybe I'll later see if you can identify them, see how that works. So just a sort of another way of looking at that is when we under normal conditions, we just have incremental change, and we don't need to adapt to it. But sometimes there's structural change where things have changed and they're not going to go back. It's not just a cyclical thing. The economy's down for a while, it comes back, it goes down. New normals are going to be created, some of which we don't yet know what those new normals are going to be. In those cases, we can't afford to just say, well, let's just wait and see what happens. We've got to make changes proactively in our communities to make sure that we continue to thrive economically, socially, environmentally in the world as it's going to be, not necessarily in the world as it has been. So right now, I'd say we are here at one of those periods where we're experiencing a wide array of structural changes in our county. As I talk about, I've been saying we're moving to Santa Clara County 3.0, what I mean by that is, an era is sort of a long period of similar conditions within a particular place, and when one era ends, another one begins. The frontier was settled, and became a nation of towns and cities and so on, that kind of change. That was a change in the era. Locally, I think Santa Clara County's history from a planning perspective could be divided into three categories. Santa Clara County 1.0, which is what we call the pre-suburban era. It was basically before 1960, just to arbitrarily put in a date for it. It's before we started becoming a suburban nation, suburban valley, back from what was called the Valley of Hearts, so like going back to when the Ohlonies lived here. So that's 1.0, the pre-suburban era. 2.0 is the suburban era. That's what we've been living in for the last 60 years, essentially, in Santa Clara County. And 3.0 is what we're beginning to experience now, and what we will be experiencing for the next several decades and on in the future is the urban and suburban hybrid era, where we have both a combination of both urban and suburban. But to sort of illustrate how these things happen, let me go back in time and give a real quick overview of how did Santa Clara County become a suburban community. It wasn't always that way. So I'm going to talk about how did we go from the pre-suburban era to the suburban era, and then some lessons from that as we look toward the future. What did we learn from that? Well, we weren't always suburbs here. This was arch orchards way back when. And the history of how that changed is sort of has both national and local elements that interlock. Back in the 1930s, this valley looked something like that. You were standing over the hillside in the springtime and all the blossoms and all the orchards, and it was called the Valley of Hearts Delight. It was known worldwide for the fruits and things that it grew and canned in many cases and shipped around the world. But while that was happening here, the country and the world was experiencing Great Depression. And that had implications here too as well, obviously. But and it was not the best of times. It was a time in which our cities were decaying because the money was not there to keep properties up and so on. We had shanty towns, the current equivalent of some of the homeless encampments we have. This is what was back then on the right was pretty common throughout the country. People who might have lost their homes and had to find housing elsewhere end up, well, I guess those would be tiny homes, wouldn't they? I thought about that. Well, there you go. There you go. The first tiny
Full circle.
We could do better than that, I'm sure. But anyway, that was what happened. That's how we dealt with homelessness, if you will, to a large extent back during the Great Depression. Well, in the middle of all of this gloom and doom of the Great Depression, something happened in New York City that changed things, that set us on a different path. There was a World's Fair. And the title was Building the World of Tomorrow. And in the midst of all of this gloom and doom and depression and horrible social and economic conditions, they had this World's Fair, And there was a pavilion there. This is what the General Motors pavilion looked like. You can't really see it probably from where you are, but there's long lines going, they look like ants on there, but those are people. Long lines of people waiting to get into this building, to see this pavilion, to see the future as General Motors at least presented it. And once they got inside, what they would have seen was this, what was called the World of the Future diorama. The diorama is sort of, looks like a mural, but it has little moving parts in it. So you can see the people up in the balcony sort of looking down on the city of the future, which basically is a suburb. It was a prototype for the suburbs. And they had little cars and trucks moving around on this thing. You can find videos of it on YouTube. You can get a sense of what it looked like. It was quite amazing. And you can imagine if you were living in the middle of the Depression, and suddenly somebody's saying, you could live in someplace like this. You weren't stuck in a crowded city with the decaying buildings, and where you could just drive wherever you wanted to go and all of that. That would be pretty exciting. And it was. It certainly was. And it was very inspirational. And they even give you a little bucket to take home that I've seen the future. That was the future as laid out by General Motors back in 1939. Well, we couldn't quite, a lot of people would have liked to start living in that future right then and there, but there were two obstacles. The Great Depression was still going on, and we were in the middle of World War II. So we didn't start building the suburbs right away, but eventually the war ended. And then we had another set of challenges we had to deal with. One of them was that we had a lot of veterans coming home who needed employment. We can't put them to work building more tanks because there's no need for more tanks after the war is over. So that was one of the challenges. So we need to figure out how to deal with that. Another one was where do we house the new families that are being created, the baby boomers so-called. When the veterans came back and started having families, we needed more housing. And often the conditions in the cities were not such that a lot of people wanted to live there, even if they could afford it or whatever. So we started building housing for the baby boom generation. Putting that little rascal there. I'm sure you see the resemblance. It was also a time when there was a lot of vacant land surrounding our cities, which were mostly smaller towns at that time, and cheap gasoline. When I learned how to drive in Minnesota way back in the day, I think it was 29 cents a gallon was the price. Some of you may remembrances of times back then. Another thing that happened that changed was the development of the interstate highway system. We now call them freeways. But the rationale for them was not because we wanted to build suburbs. The rationale was for defense purposes. We just fought a war in Europe, and we saw how the Germans were able to move troops around on the Autobahn so quickly. Well, we did something like that. That's how it was sold anyway, was that this was a way we could move troops from the West Coast to the East Coast or vice versa if we had another war where we were going to be invaded. So it was, President Eisenhower was president at the time, and it was, I forget the title of the bill, but it had something to do, this was like a defense highway system is the way it was sold. But what it really did, it's never served that purpose in any major way, but what it has done is opened up land surrounding our cities that would have been impossible to develop in suburbs because we'd all be stuck on driving a 2-lane road, getting back and forth, and it just would have happened. So the freeway system was one of the other elements that led us to creating suburbs. And what it did then is we solved, by creating the suburbs, we solved our housing problems, employment problems at the time, provide alternatives to the decaying cities. The other part of that story, when you get back to California, is after the war, there were a lot of people who were stationed here during the war or passed through here on their way to combat elsewhere in the world. But when they got home to Iowa and it was snowing afterwards, and were trying to figure out what they were going to do with the rest of their lives, they remembered those palm trees, those oranges growing there. You just reach out and touch them. You don't even have to grow them or do anything with them. They're just there. And this became a magnet for people. Now, if they'd come out here and there wasn't any jobs, that would have been kind of a waste of time. But as it turned out, that coincided with the early development of the aerospace industry here in Santa Clara County. Companies like Lockheed and Hewlett-Packard and so on had jobs for them. But even more, there were jobs related to the new development. Jobs building houses, jobs doing electrical work, jobs selling furniture, jobs selling real estate, jobs, all of that. There was a whole industry that was just related to building new housing and shopping centers and so on and so forth. And so that was a perfect combination. We solved the problem of the post-war problems by building the suburbs. I don't know if you noticed the fine print up there.
Yeah.
This is over on White Road. $95 moves you in. Wow, those are the days. Well, that was if you were a veteran and had one. It was under the GI Bill, as it was called. Then you could do that. But different times. But essentially, that shows you kind of how a place that was predominantly a valley of hearts delight within a relatively short period of a decade or two, became predominantly suburban communities, suburban-based valley. In 1950, our population was a little under 300,000. By 1970, it was over 1 million. And we evolved from Santa Clara County 1.0, which looks something like that, to Santa Clara County 2.0, which looks something like that, and still does. But now we are at a so that was a major transition point from one era to another. And we are now entering another one. We are at another one of those turning points, transition points, however you want to describe it, in which the valley is going to be, if you look back 20 years from now to what we are today compared to what we'll be then, it'll be a very different place in many ways. And that's part of what I sort of challenge you to do, is become part of the process to determine how does it evolve? How do we meet our future challenges? How do we accommodate growth in ways that makes it a better place to live rather than a worse place? So what are some of the forces that are bringing about these changes? Why does it seem almost inevitable we're going to become more urban? Well, about 5 or 6 of them here that I'm going to summarize for you. Starting off with population growth, that's always one of the big ones. Right now, Santa Clara County has a population just under 2 million people, about 1.9 million. Over the next 15 years, roughly, 2015 to 2030, the projections are we will be adding 300,000 more residents. Overwhelming number, kind of hard to wrap your head around. Think of that as 2 more Sunnyvales. 2 more Sunnyvales in this valley within the next just over a decade or so. Going to be different. And the other thing about that is it's not going to be in some magic land we haven't developed yet. It's probably not going to be in Coyote Valley. It's not likely to be much of it in South County. It is essentially going to be within the North Valley here, within the footprint of our existing communities. And the reason for that is the next factor, which is limited land supply. Here's just a map showing the sort of geographic extent. We have 15 cities. I'm only showing 3 of them here just for reference. But from Palo Alto to the north down to Gilroy, that's Santa Clara County. But if you look more closely, divide it up, where could we put those additional 300,000 people? Well, maybe in the hills and mountains. No, that's not going to happen. Coyote Valley and South County, not going to happen there for the most part either, for a variety of reasons. Which leaves only the North Valley, which is this area here from Palo Alto to Cupertino, San Jose, Milpitas, and all the other cities within that. But that is where those 300,000 additional people, the bulk of them, are going to be located. Another way of looking at that is this is our current population. This is what adding the 300,000 would look like, but it's not going to be out of the edge somewhere. It's going to be scattered throughout our communities, and that's when we become more urban in different places, denser, higher, whatever. Come back to that in a moment. The third thing that's moving us toward becoming more urban is the continued job growth. This happens, we happen to have, they call Disneyland the happiest place on earth. I think we're one of the happiest economically, aside from what's happening out in housing. In terms of job formation, this is one of the happiest places on earth. We are a region that is sort of the envy of the world, the envy of our country in terms of the way we have been able to create jobs. A couple of months, just 2 years ago, and one just even this year, 7,000 more jobs in 1 month. That's the kind of job growth it's attracting. Remember before I said the things that make people move around? Part of it is economic opportunity. This is the economic opportunity that's drawing people here. And we need to recognize that we something. Well, if we can just stop the job growth, we need to be quite careful about going too rashly in that direction, because our local economy is what, first of all, provides income to our local residents, as well as revenues to our local government. So if we start diminishing or impacting those revenues, that can come back to bite us. It's not to say we should accept just unlimited job growth, but I'm saying most of these problems are complex. There's no one simple answer. Everything we do has consequences on the other side that we need to factor in. The reality is that jobs are people magnets. You create more jobs, you can attract more people. It's just the nature of things. Always has been. The gold rush, you can go back there. They came because there were jobs, there was money to be made. That's just, again, human nature. Another thing that's moving us toward becoming more urban is the aging of the baby boomers. And I'm going to start at that one from kind of an odd perspective. I'm going to start at the global population. Right now in the world, we have about 7.6 billion. The projections over the next 15 years are another 1 billion more people on this planet with us in the next 15 years. But it's probably not for reasons that you were thinking of, or that when I first saw that number, I thought, well, we're just having too many babies. We've got to do something about birth control in those other countries. The reality is, in fact, total births worldwide have been pretty steady for the last decade or so, and are projected to stay steady into the future. It's not for having more and more babies. The total number of babies born each year for the last decade or so has been pretty much the same. So we can't explain population growth because there are more and more babies being born. It's not happening. The reason is we're not looking at the right end of the age spectrum. We're living longer. And so we're not subtracting people from the population at the rates we once were. Thank goodness for the most part. That's one of those people who's living a longer life than I would have in earlier days. That's great. Speaking of that, back in 1900, the average life expectancy at birth on this planet was only 30 years. You'd be an old person at age 30 in many countries. Now that's up to 67 on a worldwide basis. Here in the United States, 1947 years was the average life expectancy. That's now up to 77 or so, somewhere in that range. So we are living longer, better sanitation, better medication, better health care of all sorts. So that's part of the reason that's one of the driving forces for population growth is that we're sticking around longer, so we aren't being subtracted from the overall numbers at the rate that we once were. An example of that is that if you look at first of all, the boomers are the folks who were born from 46 through 64, roughly, 54 to 72 years now. Between 2020 and 2015, for every young person we added to the United States population, we added nearly 8 seniors. That's the beginning of some people refer to that as the senior tsunami. There are a number of things, and some seniors don't like that, and so I don't know what to call it, but that's what's happening here. A lot of us are becoming older and in disproportion to the rest of the population. Let's look at California. Over the next 15 years, the projection for California is that we are going to be growing by 5 million more people. Think of that as 5 more San Jose's in California by 2030. Not all in one place, but that's what the total amount will be. But it's not going to be evenly distributed among all age categories. It looks more like this. That in fact, in 2030, there will be fewer young people under 18 than there are. There will be fewer people under 18 in California then than there are today. Modest increase in 18 to 64, but over 3/4 of our growth over the next 15 years is projected to be in that 65 plus age category. That's creating a very different population than what we had when we built the suburbs. When we were building for young kids and babies, you had a backyard with room for the playground, with the swings and the sandbox and so on. Now, some of you may wonder, well, is that because all those folks from Arizona are coming in here because their air conditioners failed? No, it's not going to be that. What it is we currently have a lot of people who are over 65 and will still be around in 15 years. We also have a lot of people who are currently age 15 to 64, who 15 years from now will be over 65. There may be a different color, but they'll be maybe not a different color, but there will be more of us. So that's what the state looks like. 3/4 of our growth over the next decade is going to be in the 65 plus age group. Lots of implications, not the least of which is I think we're going to see the senior discount go away in some restaurants. That could be able to stay in business. Santa Clara County, the projection looks like this. Again, a decline in the total number of school age or under 19 and under over the next decade. Modest increase in 20 to 64, but 65%, roughly 2/3 of the growth in this county over the next 15 years is projected to be in that 65 plus category. And there are a lot of reasons, I'll get to it in a few minutes, as to why that's going to be moving us toward becoming more urban as we have a population, give a little bit of weight, a population with a lot of non-drivers who will be looking for places to live where they continue to live active lives without having to drive a car, especially as the traffic gets closer to the 300,000 people in the valley. Right now, roughly 1 out of 8 of us is over 65 in Santa Clara County. It comes into 1 out of 5 adults are over 65. Sorry, that slide is wrong. It should read it. 1 out of 5 adults in our, 1 out of 5. In 2030, it will be 1 out of 5. So up to 1 out of 5 of us. But if you take out the younger people, 1/4 of our adult population will be over 65 in 2030. Just 12 years from now. And that could happen sooner. When we were talking earlier with somebody here about if we were to stop population growth. Well, what we're stopping is the younger people coming in, which means those of us who stay here, our population growth will be older faster. We don't have younger people coming in to take the jobs and so on and so forth. That's another conversation for another time. So let's ask the so what question. So what, we're getting older. What's the big deal? How does that impact land use and so on? How does it make us want to become a more urban place? Well, we made a lot of assumptions when we built those suburbs back in the 1960s. One of them was we'd all be able to drive forever. Certainly the way I felt when I got behind the wheel for the first time. But that may or may not be true. There are a lot of us who will, unfortunately, not be able to drive or shouldn't be driving or whatever. Statistically, the national survey shows that 1 out of 5 Americans over 65 doesn't drive. Many more cut back on driving as gas prices go up, or I would guess in many cases as housing prices, as the rents have gone up. One of the things that's expendable is the traveling and the trips. So anyhow, we have a lot of non-driving seniors. Another way of looking at that is, in addition to our life expectancy, we have something that I just learned about a couple of years ago. First of all, our life expectancy changes throughout our lives. After you get, the older you get, it's an irony, the older you get, the older you're going to get. Because you've gotten past the childhood diseases, the crazy teenage years when you can subtract yourself from the population by doing stupid things, whatever. So if you are a woman in this country who reaches roughly age 70 and are still driving, you've got another 21 years to live on average. Congratulations. Your driving expectancy, however, is only another 11 years on average, meaning you are likely to spend the last 10 years of your life as a non-driver. For men, the numbers are similar. I think total life expectancy will be shorter, 17 years, same 11-year driving expectancy, so last 6 years as a non-driver on average. And we all have examples of our 98-year-old grandmother who's still driving. Well, there certainly are anomalies, but on average, a good many of us will not be driving throughout the remainder of our life. Imagine this woman here. Imagine this is, I used to use this with young students in San Jose State Planning Program. I'd have asked them to imagine this to their grandmother. So let's just go with that one for the time being. This is your grandmother. She'd be 140 years old if she were alive today, but that's something else again. Skip that. Imagine this is where she and her husband raised their family. They have several children. The kids have all gone off to college, now gone off to move away. Unfortunately, her husband passed away a couple of years ago. And now, so she lives alone, and most recently she's become unable to drive for one reason or another. Maybe it's a vision problem, maybe it's reflexes, maybe she's just scared to death going out there and all that traffic. Nearest grocery store is a mile away. Nearest place of worship or community center is a mile away. Basically, she is trapped in suburbia. A wonderful place to raise a family up to a certain point, but when you get to the point where you can no longer drive in that landscape, you've got a different life you're experiencing. You may still be healthy and able to get around, but you can't drive for whatever reason. We have not built a community that's very friendly toward pedestrians, for people who don't drive or don't want to drive. So we basically built the suburbs on the assumption that we wouldn't age. And there's one person to blame for that more than any other. The unofficial planner of the American suburbs. Either man, I won't grow up. So that was the assumption. That was kind of the mindset back in the day. Well, for those of you who may be wondering what Peter's up to today, he's retired. He's living on Social Security in Sun City, Arizona. He sold his car and only drives a golf cart. Only flies to visit his grandkids. And keeps in touch with Captain Luke via Facebook. So that's where he is today. But the serious point underlying all of this is that our needs and our preferences change over time during the course of our lives. What was good for us when we were younger, raising a family, will be different than what we want and need as we get older. So the neighborhoods that were fun to grow up in or raise families in may be problematic to grow old in. And that's one of the challenges we face as we figure out how do we plan the future of our cities as we accommodate 300,000 more people here. How do we do that development in ways that recognize the needs of our existing residents as well, some of whose needs may be different than when they moved into the housing that they now occupy. This is also a thing we should recognize. This is not just a problem for seniors. It's often a problem for their adult children who have to take time out from work if they live in the same area to take them to the doctor or get the leaves off the roof of their parents' home in the fall or whatever. So that's one of the other things with aging our population is moving us towards becoming more urban. Also, the rise of millennials. These are the folks who are currently in the, or between 1980 and 2000, currently teens through early 30s. We're over boomers. There are now more millennials in this country than there are boomers. They are now the largest generation in this country. And so we've got to pay attention to them because they also constitute the majority of our workforce. If we want to have governments that can afford to pay for the services that we're going to want as we get older, we're going to need to have somebody working and paying taxes to make that happen. It's largely going to be them. They're the sort of folks that Google salivates over. I see them every time I drive out for lunch out in that area. I think I've ever seen even over 30 crossing the street in that area. Either they stay indoors at noon or there just aren't any of them out there. And they have a strong preference for living in urban settings. It's reflected, for one thing, in driver's licenses. The current millennials have a lower percentage of driver's licenses than any cohort since the 1960s, since the late 1960s, when the boomers were just getting started. They don't like to drive. I talked with several of them just a weekend ago, had dinner with several, and one of them doesn't have a driver's license and doesn't ever expect to get one, and so they never expect to own a car. They'll walk, they take Uber. They don't like the suburban lifestyle. They've grown up in the suburbs, but they don't like it. Many of you see the Google buses going up and down the freeway. That basically, in part, reflects it's not just housing price. No, that's part of it. The part of it is that many of them don't mind working down here, but they don't want to live down here. They want to live in the city. They want an urban lifestyle. They don't have to own a car. They don't have to drive everywhere. So it's a different thing, and they are now a majority of the workforce. We have to factor their preferences in. So we need to recognize, as we plan for the future, that millennials are part of the equation. They'd rather, as I was just showing, walk or take public transit than jump in the car and stuff like this, like the rest of us do. Another thing here, though, is that I've talked about the boomers and millennials as though they were separate tribes. There are some things that they have in common, which is that if you divide the way we built our communities into two types of neighborhoods, walkable urban and drivable suburban. The difference being, simplistically, if you get up Sunday morning and you need a quart of milk, do you put on your shoes to walk down to the grocery store a block away, or do you get the car keys out because you got to drive a mile to get to that quart of milk? Those are basically, if you simplify it, those are two choices. Well, clearly the millennials are overwhelmingly in favor of the walkable urban model. That's the kind of communities they want to live in for the most part. What about the boomers? Many of them are now, the kids are gone, and so they're looking at their futures. If they have a two-story house, those stairs get steeper every year for some reason. Getting them to involve, having to drive through this kind of traffic is no picnic. Not what they want to spend their golden years doing. And they want to spend more time, leave the house or the condo or whatever, and go visit the kids and grandkids and so on. So many boomers are relocating. And I think it's a fair assumption that most of them are not going to be trading up. They're not looking for a bigger house with more yard, more rooms to maintain. They're looking for smaller things. They're probably looking for a walkable neighborhood, a place where they don't have to drive to the grocery store, where they don't have to walk to the community center, to library, or what have you, coffee shop. So when you add in the lifestyle preferences of a growing number of boomers, the ones who don't necessarily want to stay in their current home or can't for whatever reasons, that again is moving toward the walkable urban future. Another way of looking at this is, imagine you got a letter from this couple here. And it reads, "My wife and I have lived in our single family home for the past 40 years. But now we want to move to a neighborhood where we can continue living an active lifestyle without owning an automobile. Does your city have a neighborhood like that we can move to?" And if the answer is no, then we haven't really met the needs of the increasing number of aging boomers who want to continue living in the communities that they've had their friends and their acquaintances and their memories are all here. But if there are no places for them to move to, they end up going out of state or someplace else and probably aren't as happy as they would have been if they could have stayed in their own communities. Looking at it from the other perspective, from the millennials, the letter from this young couple: "We are the young professionals who have the skills and knowledge that your high-tech economy depends on. We prefer to live in vibrant urban neighborhoods where we can live active lifestyles without driving a car. Does your city have a neighborhood like that we can move to?" So I think that same question is that if you're looking for a very simple report card for whether your city's ready for the future or not, do you have neighborhoods where there's plenty of housing that people like the seniors or the millennials could move to and live an independent lifestyle without having to own an automobile? If not, you're not prepared either for the present or for the future. Another thing that's moving us toward more urban is traffic congestion. If you think it's bad now, imagine what it's going to be like when we had 300,000 more residents in the next decade, and more commuters coming through who are just passing through and jobs elsewhere. The thing is, Louis Mumford, who's an interesting guy, multiple careers, sort of city planner, historian, sociologist, made this observation about building more roads to solve the problems. Adding highway lanes to deal with traffic congestion is like loosening your belt to cure a beast. They just fill up, and traffic engineers actually have a term, it's called induced traffic. You build more lanes, more traffic is generated to use them. Having spent an hour and 15 minutes to get down here tonight from Mountain View to talk to you, I know what that looks like. In fact, I think I'm in the car, second car. And what we need to realize is that this is how much space it takes up to move 200 people in 177 cars. A couple of them are carpool or multiple riders. Compared to if we have land use patterns where people can take transit or take buses or bicycle, the amount of space it would take to accommodate moving that many people would be dramatically lower. And the reality is that transit is just not cost effective for the most part in our suburban landscape. We can never tax ourselves enough to have buses running up and down every cul-de-sac in suburbia to pick up anybody who happens to be out there looking for a ride. So we're going to have to find new solutions. And that's an interesting challenge right now if you're a transportation planner. It's both the most exciting and most frightening time probably in their careers. There's so many emerging possibilities, so many new technologies, the ride-sharing services and so on, a lot of autonomous vehicles. But we don't know how that's going to play out. Will the autonomous vehicles take ridership away from the bus systems and so on? Hard to say. And there's all these choices. What we do know, I think, is we need to reduce, that our smartest strategies in the face of uncertainty is reduce automobile dependency, provide more choices for people to get around and do things. When we talk about bicycles, we've got to rethink it. I think about three-wheel bicycles that people can ride at the grocery store and bring groceries home without worrying about tipping over and so on. And even seniors can ride and not feel uncomfortable in terms of stability. But I think most important is we need to build livable mixed urban neighborhoods that will meet no matter which of these technologies for transportation and mobility come about, this is the one that will work with any of them, creating walkable urban neighborhoods. Those are easier to link up with transit system, whatever the future ones may be. Final course here, I'm going to start going a little bit faster, is the state housing laws. The state is recognizing we are facing a crisis that's getting worse and worse year by year, and it's not just here in the Bay Area, and it's having impacts throughout our society. The recent study says we need to be building 180,000 units statewide every year to meet our needs. We are building 80,000. So you can see why from the state level, leaving it up to the locals is not cutting it. We're all saying no, build it someplace else. So anyhow, and the housing prices obviously are ridiculous in this area, and this is typical of a number of other places. So we're seeing headlines regularly about housing shortages and reaching new peaks and how the teachers can't afford to live here and so on. But the one on this one that caught my attention, the new homes for middle-income families are virtually non-existent in the region. How are we changing this place? Are we comfortable with those changes? What are the implications for the future of our communities? We've got to take that more seriously and recognize that it ultimately may affect our quality of life as much as theirs. So the state is stepping in. They're saying they could pass a number of laws, some of which are sort of overriding local zoning and saying under certain circumstances, developers, one of the classic examples up here is the Valco Mall. Under a new state law passed a year ago, the developer had plans in there that were consistent with the city's zoning and everything, but the residents, the neighbors all wanted something different, and so they never got to build anything. Well, under the new law, they can build under the existing plan without having to go through all these approval processes. They just go in and basically pull building permits. That's how the state is saying, if we're not going to sit back and let local communities come up with obstacle after obstacle, neighborhood after neighborhood, so we don't solve the housing problem. So whether we like it or not, we're going to be likely to become more urban either through local action or local inaction in some cases. So this is a quick summary then of what some of the forces are moving us toward the future. Population growth, limited land supply, land economics, job growth, aging boomers, rising millennials, generational convergence, traffic congestion, housing, and so on. A couple quick points about this. We are about to experience a tidal wave of change, like it or not. We are on an inevitable course to becoming more urban. Not necessarily in a good way, but that's what we have to work on. A bit overwhelming at times to even think about it. We may not like it, but we can't afford to ignore it. And we can't run away from the future. We need to embrace it. We need to recognize that we can help shape our future rather than simply being the victims of our future. Well, how do we do that? A couple quick things. First of all, related to attitudes. First one, be realistic. Change is coming, whether we like it or not. Big changes are coming, and they're coming fast. So the option is either change versus no change. It's guided change versus random change. Second thing is we need to imagine a better future. Some of us have only known the suburbs. From my time of birth till now, I've always lived in suburbs, so I hardly know anything. It's like the fish in the fish tank that doesn't know what an ocean is. But we've got to begin to develop that sort of imagination, to expand our civic imagination to match the creativity of our valley's private sector imagination. Think of how can we make this valley even better? How can we create this to be the most senior-friendly valley in the country? How would we do that? Those are the kind of questions we need to be asking ourselves. We need to recognize that growth is often a bad thing, but it also has good sides. It's the two-edged sword. How and where it happens often is the thing that matters, not whether it happens. It's going to happen. But also focusing on the future. Sometimes we get focused on what we want today rather than what we will need tomorrow. Back from a planning perspective, that's kind of what land use planning is about. It's a perpetual tug of war between current wants and future needs. Usually it's the current wants that those are the loudest voiced at the city council meetings that went out. But we've got to recognize that we need to find a balance between our current wants and our future needs. Whereas one distinguished urban planner once said, you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, something in your kitchen now, you just might find, when ready to do the last line with me, you get what you need. All right, we then know who the planner was. That was the ever popular urban planner, Mick Jagger. But that's the truth. We do have to distinguish our current, what we want today and what we're going to need tomorrow may be different things. We better not cut off the opportunity. What we might need tomorrow is housing where we can walk to the grocery store and we've got to recognize that if we're say no to all new development in our community, we've cut off that future option. Also, I think we need to recognize increasingly that helping ourselves is sometimes the best way to do that is to help others. We sometimes talk about, for example, how teachers can't afford to live in our communities, firemen, policemen, and so on. One of the things we need to add to that list and pay more attention to is all the health and elder care workers that our aging population is going to need. Because they make less money generally than teachers and firemen and policemen by far. If they can't afford to live here, they're not going to be here when we need them. So if we're not building the housing for them, sometimes say, well, we don't want more housing because it'll make my life worse. Well, if you don't have them around, your life's going to get worse anyway. And it's beginning to happen. There's already one agency up in Sunnyvale that's been providing, for the last 30 years, has been in-home services for seniors, closed down because its workers couldn't afford to live in this area. That's just the tip of the iceberg. That's just the beginning of what's going to be happening. So we've got to recognize if we don't help them, if we don't care, the best way to take care of ourselves is to take care of others as well. Just attitude sort of change. We need to overcome our fear of density. My favorite villa there, Denzilla, coming to tear up our strip malls. You need to recognize that density from a planning perspective is just another tool in the city building toolkit. And it's like all tools, we can use them wisely or unwisely. What we've got to do is learn how to use density wisely. We have to recognize many things we say we want in our community. We want affordable housing. We want better public transit. We want we want a healthy environment, a healthy local economy. None of those are possible without building at higher density. That's just the reality, given we're a built-out community at this point. So density is an important city building tool if it's used wisely. And that means well-planned and appropriately located. It's not just density everywhere, but density where it belongs and no density where it doesn't belong. The challenge is to figure out where we want it and not simply where we don't want it. So these are the attitudes. We need to be more realistic about change. We need to be optimistic about the future, accept the dilemmas of growth, help others by helping ourselves, overcome fear of density. A couple actions I want to touch on before I wrap up here shortly. One of the things we do in terms of actions, we need to be proactive. We need to guide the change. We basically, with regard to change, we've got four choices. We can accept it, we can resist it, we can mitigate it, make it smaller, make it happen somewhere else, or we can guide it. All of those are appropriate responses depending on the circumstances, accepting, resisting, mitigating, and guiding. But by far the most important is the guiding it, because that's the way you know that when it's done, you've got something. If you're simply resisting everything, what happens anyway? It would be just random change. It may not add up to anything that benefits your community, whereas if you guide all that growth into the right place, you might have a great urban walkable neighborhood where healthcare workers could live, where all of us could have the choice of living in walkable communities, whatever. We need to also recognize the difference between trips and traffic. Traffic is probably the biggest villain in suburbia, and rightly so. It has great impacts on our quality of life. But we need to get beyond the assumption that whenever there's population or job growth, it means automatically we're going to have more traffic. It's not that simple. What we've got to recognize is that, yes, population growth or job growth will generate more trips. Not necessarily traffic, but trips. People needing to get from one place to another, need to get from home to the grocery store, get from home to work, whatever. But how those trips take place depends on how and where that growth occurs. You can have exactly the same amount of growth happening in two different places that have totally different traffic impacts. In one case, it might be near a transit station where people can use transit. The other one, it's where there's nothing around, and that all those people have to use their cars every day. So we need to recognize that the trips, they don't necessarily all take place through the car. Some of them could be transit trips, some of them could be walking trips, some could be biking trips. What determines that, how those trips are distributed, is how and where the growth occurs. That's what we've got to focus on. Not just every new development is horrible from a traffic perspective. No, some new development will make things better than would be otherwise. And so that's somehow we need to think about it. How and where our growth occurs will determine how much traffic we have. Another way of thinking about that is, we've got to have kittens in our slideshow, so here they are. For those who weren't paying attention, somebody did, oh, look at the kittens. All right. That's a bit of a trick. Anyway, think of them as land use and transportation, if that helps you to remind. Every time you see a pair of kittens, you go, oh, you must be land use. Oh, you're transportation. Whenever we're making a land use decision, we're also making a transportation decision. If we are building housing where there's no transit available, not likely to be, and it's isolated, there's never going to be any neighborhood around it, that's probably the wrong place. Whereas if we are saying no to housing when it's on a transit, near a transit station, and all that, we are just forcing more of those people probably to end up driving to wherever they live, may end up using more automobiles. So that's critical. You need to also, as we go forward, think about the difference between, we need to have a sort of mindset change. It's no longer going to be either or. Not suburban or urban. That's how most of us have viewed it. That we need to live in a good suburban neighborhood or a good urban neighborhood. We are going to have to think that we have both. How can we plan for both? Great urban neighborhoods and while maintaining great suburban neighborhoods at the same time. So we require good planning. It means we're going to have to focus on our urban growth in the right places and not just scattered around town in a hodgepodge fashion. And most of our cities will be sort of a combination of both, but the more we can be on the hybrid end of things with focused urban rather than scattered urban, the better off we'll be. We need to plan to become intelligent more urban. We'll run through these very quickly. We need to create great urban neighborhoods. The kinds that we often, when we travel, we like to go see because they're so vibrant, they're so lively, they're so interesting. Most of the people in those countries don't come to visit our suburbs for some reason. It's about creating places that are interesting to live and livability and can provide convenience, not just about building density. It's about building complete neighborhoods where we can find all of the things we need within a 15-minute walk, let's say, or by using public transit, whatever. My shorthand for this, we need to create livable, green, urban neighborhoods. All of those are the building blocks for sustainable cities that benefit everyone. Livable, green, urban neighborhoods. And I won't read all of the titles and the subtitles, but all of these things, being livable, being sustainable, being urban, are what we need to do. This is not some exotic new idea that planners have come up with and we're flying around in spaceships. Elon Musk maybe, but not us. It's actually an American tradition. It's the way we used to build our cities back before we became a suburban community. We just need to update that model to meet current needs. So this is the actions we need to take, is becoming more proactive, guiding the change, focusing on trips, not traffic, planning for the best of both worlds, planning to become totally more urban. And now, the word you've all been waiting for, some final thoughts. And those are, we are going to become more urban one way or another. We've got to become more comfortable with that. We need to be able to talk about it in a civil voice, so we aren't shouting at each other, no, we don't make this land happen. Well, that's not what's being proposed. It's a 3-story building, that's not land happen. Whatever. And sort of challenge you, well, first of all, who is this? Natalie, all right, and what is the movie? Psycho, all right, good. People of a certain age got that one more easy than others do. Anyhow, back to the presentation. The two scariest words in the suburbs or in suburbia are density and urban. And if you were to freak people out, say urban density. I'd like you to help me with the experiment. First of all, identify the actor. It's harder. You don't What do you think of this? Boris Karloff, I'll make it simple. It was Boris Karloff played the mummy and whatever it was. Frankenstein, I guess, is one of those things. All right, anyhow, before most of your time. Help me with this experiment anyway. I'd like you to say with me the word density 3 times. Ready? Density, density, density. All right, now we're going to say urban the same way. Urban, urban, urban. All right, now look to your left, to your right. Everybody okay? What you have just done is you participated in the experiment that's proven we can talk about becoming more urban, and it's not fatal. We are all still alive. We've used those words, but we've survived it. In fact, we're going to have to learn how to use that as part of our vocabulary, other than as pejoratives, in order to plan for our future, because that's the direction we're headed. As long as we continue to defile and to denigrate what our future is going to be, we are not going to have a great future, because we're never going to make the right decision in terms of land use. The other thing we need to do is act with a sense of urgency. I've been talking about things that will happen by 2030. Well, it's not as though things are going to stay the same for the next 10 years and suddenly we're going to spike up. We are already on a trajectory toward an older population. You're all at least 45 minutes older than you were when you came in here and when I started talking. So it's just happening. Final thing is we need to harness the forces bringing change. We need to recognize that we live in a very special time and place here in Santa Clara County. Whose problems would you rather have, Santa Clara County's or Detroit's? Most of us would pick Santa Clara County. They're difficult challenges, for no question about that. But well, I'm giving away the punch, I'll come to that moment. We face some serious challenges, no question about that. But we also have some great opportunities here. The question is, what will we do with those unique opportunities that most other places in the country don't have? Will we seize them? Or waste them? I think what we have in terms of opportunity, we have growth, which is, if you don't have growth, there's no reason for people to invest in your community to try to make it better in many cases. So that can be a plus if it's guided in the right places. We have demographic change. It gives us a reason why we need to change our cities, because we're getting older. And our current automobile-dependent valley is not necessarily going to meet the needs of an aging population. And incidentally, the aging population is not a temporary thing that, after the boomers are gone, we're going to be young again. No, for the next 100 years, our population will be older than what we grew up with. That's just demography. The older we get, the fewer kids we have, for some reason or another. Anyhow, so economic investment. There are people willing to spend money to build things in this valley. We can see that every day as we're driving around. Those are the things we already have that other communities don't have in many cases. What we don't necessarily have is the civic imagination. We don't necessarily have the ability to think, how could our community be better? How could it be different and be better at the same time? It means we have to accept change, but it could be good change. Not all change is bad. And we need to have the political will then to do it, to move forward. We can come up with a nice plan on paper, but then if every project that comes in to implement it gets shot down, we haven't really done much. So we have all of these things. We can put all 5 of these things together: the growth, the demographic change, economic investment, civic imagination, political. We can do magic things in this valley. We can have the most senior-friendly communities, or the most livable communities in the country if we focus those resources in the right places. And final thought, coming back to Lewis Mumford again, the historian and the planner I quoted earlier, he points out that we are all leaving a legacy one way or another, whether we realize it or not. I mean, the way he puts it, each generation writes its own biography in the cities it creates. The question is, what kind of biography are we writing? What are the future generations think about us? Did we think about what their needs would be, or did we just focus on what our current needs were going to be? That's one of the sort of challenges for us, and so we need to write our biographies responsibly. So no pressure, but current and future generations are counting on us. Thank you. All right, anyone still awake? The applause just woke you up. That's good. That's the purpose of the applause at the end of our presentation. Yeah.
So I'm just curious if you can give us a couple examples. You can even go, San Mateo County, Santa Clara County, where you feel like they're doing this right, where they've done a good job of creating an urban village or an urban setting that's walkable and meeting the goals of what we're talking about.
Yeah. Many of our cities are changing, and we're still in the early stages of the changes, so it's hard to tell what what will happen. I was just walking around downtown Mountain View where I lived the other day, and I was amazed how many changes I saw that I wasn't even aware of. They weren't there 6 months ago. So the rate at which is happening is and one of my, I don't generally name cities, put that on the negative side. I don't want to speak to them someday. But I would say one of the places I would encourage you to visit if you haven't seen it, it's been one of my favorites for decades, is Redwood City.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, well, I just did.
Without a particular.
Yeah, Redwood City is an example. It's not without its challenges, and part of the challenge is that we don't know how to do good urban. That's not in our DNA of we live in a suburban community. If we were to say, okay, put in a room tomorrow, okay, design a great urban neighborhood. Most of us would, even people in elected office, people who are on planning commissions, even planning staff might not know how to do that. And so part of it is we need to do something we don't yet necessarily have the tools and the mindset and skill set to do. So that's number one. That's one of the obstacles getting us there. So inevitably in the early stages there can be some mistakes. Where we have the best of intentions, but gosh, we didn't realize that we maybe ought to face the housing toward the street rather than building these things that all face toward the middle. So it becomes the equivalent of a gated community within the city.
Yeah, we have one of those in Colorado, the mistakes.
Yeah, I'm sure there's lots of places where they are. So, yeah, I would say in terms of any city that what they did, they decided some years ago, they said they wanted to have a vibrant downtown. And they wanted to focus their growth in the living areas and protect most of their existing suburban neighborhoods. And so they did two things. They start off saying, recognize that land use is economically based in many cases. You can't just draw a plan and assume that developers are going to rush in and investors are going to rush in and build it. They asked the developers up front, where if we wanted to build higher density, if we wanted to build affordable housing without having a big ongoing subsidy for it, what would the economics if we were going to just have it so that it penciled out for the developers to build it largely with their money? What was it going to cost? And they came to the conclusion for their downtown, they needed to go 10 stories. And so they developed a plan that says, by right, you can build up to 10 stories. They're very different, but it's in a magnitude different than what we normally think of planning for. Because they wanted to have some economic reality. Simply drawing a plan, gosh, we wish that people make all this affordable housing, but it's going to only be 2 stories tall. Ain't going to happen. It's not going to pencil out as affordable housing. So they've been willing to take some chances. They've taken some arrows for doing it, some pushback. Because people say, my gosh, where did that come from? Because it's been amazing the transformation just in the last 5 years. But it's right on the Caltrain station. It's just got a lot of stuff going for it. New employment downtown is helping increase its tax base to provide services for the neighborhoods and so on.
What about Sunnyvale?
Pardon?
What about Sunnyvale? Do you think Sunnyvale's done a good job?
Well, I don't like to criticize them. I drove by them the other night. I occasionally shop coming back from some places to shop at Target. Sunnyvale years ago had a vibrant downtown, and like Santa Clara, they tore it down and decided the mall would be better, which then failed for the next several decades, and then was in lawsuits after that for a decade or so. They have now, they started building there's some shells of some 4- or 5-story buildings, there's some office buildings. They have created sort of the beginnings of it, but it's not yet there, so it's too early. And in Mountain View, there's a project that is still in the early stages. So far, it looks like they were trying to do a hybrid urban, but we want to keep the suburban parking spaces, and so it looks like some density around the parking lot. That's what I mean by just wondering, what does it take to make great urban neighborhoods? Part of it, you could play this game with your own, the folks here in your association. What are the elements of a great urban? What does it take to create a great urban neighborhood? If you were going to define it, is walkability? You probably all come to the same list eventually. It's walkability, it's convenience, it's safety, it's variety. There's a whole host of things. Well, how do we build them? What makes them? What gives them those? You start to realize that street furniture may matter, lighting may matter, and certain things, mundane things. Having buildings that are oriented toward the street, having ways for cafes or restaurants to spill out onto the street. Things we enjoy in other communities when we go visit Boston or New York or Paris or whatever else. Those are they've had decades and more than that, centuries to get it right. We've got to learn what that toolkit consists of, and we need to start applying it. And particularly ask, what would make this neighborhood? First of all, are we planning for individual developments, or are we planning for neighborhoods? We're not planning for neighborhoods. As long as we focus on individual projects, you could have a neighborhood, you could have a city full of award-winning projects and not have any award-winning neighborhoods because the pieces don't fit together. If these two things are side by side, wow. But this one's over here, they just pop up randomly. again, it's about focused urban rather than random and scattering it around that will ultimately determine success.
How does a person like me or the people in this room guide? How do we do the guiding that we're talking about?
Well, I can give sort of a general answer, and then maybe I don't follow what individual cities do, but I know that, for example, San Jose updated its general plan 5 years ago, something like that. San Jose 2040, I think, is the name of it, something like that. And what they decided was they needed to accommodate a lot of additional growth. They were going to do it rather than scale. They were trying to focus it in what they called urban villages. And so they designated a number of places throughout. Some of them were major thoroughfares, the Santa Clara Street downtown San Jose. Some of them were South Bascom's, another one. The number of them, and some of them they've already gone. I don't know if they've finished the planning for all those urban villages. That was the opportunity to, if there was one within your neighborhood or your district here, that was an opportunity, or would be an opportunity in the future to participate in that and help them shape, well, what does this urban village look like?
So is that the planning department or the city council?
Planning, well, the planning department does the work. The city council is the ones that ultimately approve the plans, and certainly the local councilman or councilwoman would be the one who would be.
We want to guide during the planning process, right?
Yeah.
How do we?
If you wait until the planning's done and then they're bringing in the project, it's too late.
Right.
They're going to say, well, it's consistent with our plan. And we developed, where were you when we developed the plan?
Yeah.
But you got to the sooner you get involved in the process. The other thing is you have to know what you need or want, not only now but in the future in your community. Getting past the sort of what we currently want is we want to get rid of all the homeless. I mean, those are legitimate needs. But we also have to look in the future. Okay, so those are things we want to get rid of. What do we want to add? And have a conversation about what would make this the best neighborhood in San Jose for people of all ages and all income.
So we should
Play that kind of game.
We should get connected with the planning department.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure that the councilman would be a good place also. Great city councilman. I've known him for a while. He's a good man. But yeah, plug into the processes. If you miss out on participating in the early process, then your voice means less. And plus that the plan may not have the local input, the local spark that needs recognition of what you think is special about your community.
One of my concerns is that in this valley, in the whole Bay Area, we're set up to fail structurally. With the politically, structurally, with transit systems that don't talk to each other, don't consult each other, actively work to undermine each other, as demonstrably they have. And is that something that has to be addressed as well? That's a tough nut, but
Absolutely.
I mean, if you can do all the designing you want, and then if you don't have the transit systems to make it work, it's going to be a failure.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I was talking to somebody earlier today. One of the somebody I often get asked, well, if they don't know anything about planning in California, say, well, who's in charge? The answer is nobody. In the Bay Area, we have some 100 cities, 9 counties. There's some saying we should count Santa Cruz, and we should count some of the Central Valley counties as part of the Bay Area. A lot of our workers live over there. But the point is, we live in a very decentralized system, governmentally. And the challenge is, well, couldn't we consolidate that? Well, it sounds like a good idea conceptually, politically. It's hard to make it happen because, for example,
other major cities haven't had to do that though. For instance, London just absorbed all the surrounding town. Well,
but again, it's a different governmental system. There's in California, San Jose cannot take over Santa Clara, so.
Well, I mean, it had to be done. It had to be done as a national, also national.
But it's a lot easier than some of the things we have built into California's structure, just in America's structure, doesn't lend itself to that. And here's the downside of it, at least politically. I suspect if you asked just a survey, would the Bay Area be better if we had some sort of regional planning function? We'd probably get overwhelming kind of, that sounds like a good idea. Would you then ask the second question, would you like someone who determines the zoning for your neighborhood to be working in Berkeley? And suddenly we say, well, maybe we aren't so hot about that idea because we've now lost, they maybe don't know what we want, and then we have a different, So that's to me, is the political reality is, back when I first came to the county, there was some serious legislation that almost passed that would have created an enforceable sort of regional plan with regional governance. It failed by 1 or 2 votes because the folks up in Napa County were, again, it was, do you want the bureaucrats in Berkeley or San Francisco to be determining what happens in your neighborhood, kind of an issue, the home rule kind of question. So that's that negative picture having been laid out. I think there's a lot we can, the more you know about what you want, the more you can help influence those things. If the only things you want are negative, well, we don't want this, we don't want that, it's harder to get the system to, I mean, you can get the system to respond, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a better neighborhood. Once, for example, the light rail system for pluses and minuses would not have happened had that not been a strong will by 1 or 2 people in this county, frankly, to help make that happen. Because of all the resistance you run into, it's hard to do that. But if you know what you want and have some effective spokespeople, you've got a better chance of getting that. So, and also if you work with other neighborhoods, you are a separate neighborhood association if you want an island. At home tonight, I'm sure I've passed through several neighborhoods, and I'm not certain if there are any signs that say I've left your neighborhood and now I'm entering the next neighborhood. So sometimes you may have similar goals to, figure out how if you were going to plan for this area of San Jose, what area would you include? Maybe more than just your neighborhood. And then start figuring, well, maybe you've got some influence if you can come together, if you have some common needs. If you all want some of the same things, maybe you can make it happen. I'm giving sort of waffly answers there. I don't have easy answers. We live in a democracy where I've attended some wonderful presentations in the past where they were oriented toward planning. And they started looking at the great things that they did in South Korea by opening up this river that had been underground. Now they've got a park going in the middle of their street, in the middle of their downtown where there was once a river under the pipe under or the things that have happened in Chicago or New York City. All of those have strong mayors. That's one of the things we've got to recognize is that our suburban form of government really makes it hard for anyone. First of all, no one's in control there. The mayor usually doesn't have any authority, much more authority than the other people on the council. And so we live in a structural system that almost defies implementing grand visions unless we build great support around them, consensus to do them. Because you elect a mayor and he or she says, my vision is for this. And in most cities, they're mayor for 1 year and it rotates to the next person on the board. So they have no authority to fire and hire public works directors, parks directors, and things like that. So again, we have a lot of structural deficiencies that we're not likely to overcome, but the more we can build consensus as to what we do want and add to the larger the group of people we can bring to the table and say, we all want this, the better off we'll be. That's just kind of a way of dealing with a system that sort of thrives on inertia. It's hard to move the levers. If you move the levers, you've got more people pushing on the lever, you've got a better chance of making something happen. Is that waffly enough? I thought there's another hand somewhere back there. Yes, sir.
So in the county, we have a land use group that says, they're from multiple cities, and they tell us this land could be used. Because my son's a real estate guy, and they told him they couldn't use it because there's a land use group, and they're representing the cities in the county. So do you know about that group?
No.
Okay.
Not by that description. There is no such group that has that authority in this county.
Okay, I'll just find some more and get it to you.
Yeah. When I first came to Santa Clara County, when I hired in Santa Clara County Planning Office, I worked in what's called the Metropolitan Coordination Section. Our job was exactly, we didn't have any, again, it was still a fragmented system. We recognize that the way we can overcome this fragmentation is by working together, city by city. So I staffed an organization called the Planning Policy Committee that had one city council representative from every city, one planning commissioner from every city. They met every month. They had subcommittees dealing with the baylands, dealing with the hillsides, dealing with solid waste, dealing with some of the things that we shared as problems. We sort of lost that infrastructure and the capacity to do that. That's one of the things we can be doing to move back in that direction, is to recreate even the vehicles for people to have more contact between one another, to get a sense that the city limit doesn't begin and end at our boundaries, the world doesn't begin and end at our boundaries. I was telling someone just before this meeting that if I could do one thing, require one thing in all cities, it would be that every city council chamber has to have up on its wall a map of the county, not just a map of the city limits. Like it's, we're only responsible for this territory. What happens up there, we don't care about. We've got to all recognize we are part of a region. We are part of a sub-region anyway, a county where what we do impacts one another. And the more we are reminded of that, maybe the better off we'll come. In addition to having some of these opportunities to work together, if we had some of these, the institutional structure for doing it. And no one's going to come away with that with any power. but sometimes we at least form a consensus. Here's what we should be doing about transportation. Here's what we should be doing about housing or what have you. We just sort of lack the governmental institutions to do that for the most part. It can be easy, but again, a lot easier to get your way if you know what your way is, what you want. So figure that out. Yes, ma'am.
How about self-driving technology?
How about it?
Yeah.
That's one of the big unknowns. And I just started to read an article the other night about it. Several different dimensions. It's, the experts who talk for hours about it, and I'm certainly no expert on it. I think there's some unknown questions about it. One of which is how will it impact traffic? In some cities, San Francisco, I think, recently did a study, maybe New York as well. They found that actually, when you drive, well, at least two things. There's the totally autonomous vehicle where you're totally in control, as opposed to the one where it's put a ride service. So Uber or Lyft. Do that one first, then come back to it. And eventually they may merge. You may call Uber, and maybe a car that arrives, there's no driver in it. And so that's part of the complication now is which model is going to prevail in the future. Will we all own our own driverless cars? Will we all just rent them or call them on demand? It makes it hard to plan whether we're going to need, here's one scenario. The best scenario is we have all of these driverless vehicles that are sort of on call to us. We have some sort of gadget, our smartphone or whatever, and the car comes up and picks us up in front of our condo and takes us to the shopping center, and then it goes and parks. But because it doesn't have to pick anybody up, it can park in a space that's this wide. It doesn't need to have room for the doors to open while it's parked. So what that means is we're going to have a lot more room in shopping center parking lots that could be used for housing or other things. So that's, and I'm sure I'm not getting quite to your point, but there are so many different facets of it that it's hard to know what are the implications for the future of planning based on driverless cars. The other thing I worry about or think about sometimes is, I know I have a navigation system in my Ford Escape. It's a couple of years old, but it was designed by Microsoft, and half the time when I tell her I want to go, it says, I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that. Or it comes with the wrong address or whatever. And I can imagine some person getting in their car, thinking in a driverless car, and say, take me to Santa Clara. And they're on their way, before they know it, they're on their way to Santa Clarita in Southern California because the car misunderstood them. And now suddenly they aren't technically, if they couldn't set the timer on their old VCR, couldn't set the clock on their old VCR, how are they going to tell the car to stop and take you back to I didn't mean that. I meant Santa Clara, not Santa Clarita. I think there's a way to get, there's an article that I was just starting to read, where was it? Some obscure publication called The City. It was saying that people are having some second thoughts about the safety of the driverless car. There's been a couple of accidents now where people have gotten killed. There's lots of questions about where pedestrians were hit by a driverless car. And they haven't as many miles as Google has done driving through my neighborhood in Mountain View. They still haven't come anywhere as near enough miles to prove to the safety people the number of casualties per 1,000 miles or 100,000 miles is really that much different. So depending on what metric you're looking at, is this a safer thing? Does it have less traffic? Does it, you can come up with different theories as to how it's going to play out. Right now, it's not clear. And also, if it undermines our bus systems, okay, but there's some people who are never going to be tech savvy or enough to use them. Especially maybe the older people who are going to have most trouble dealing with the technology changes. And then there are those of us who may have a custom car. I don't want to stop driving my '57 Thunderbird, but it doesn't have all that technology in it. And when I get out on the road, instead of the cars being able to get this close because they all are controlled by these computers, they have to back off because they don't know what the hell I'm going to do. My old car. That's a minor hiccup, but it means that there's a lot more obstacles between now and that becoming a common thing. When will the regulators consider it to be safe enough to allow it to happen universally on the roads? And can we? The one I've been thinking about in terms of Google has been working on this certainly a lot. I don't know if you're familiar with Page Mill Road that winds up from Palo Alto up into Skyline. Very windy, I don't think most of it even has lines, so there's not enough room for the center lines. And the drop-off is like that. I'll drive in a driverless car when the head of Google is willing to drive up there on a rainy night. then I'll know it's safe. If they're willing to take a chance with that, then maybe we've solved the technological problems. But I think that's great potential. I'm not a Luddite here trying to say it's a bad idea. But I don't think it's going to happen as soon as most people say it's at least a decade away before some of these things will be approved or the technology will be good enough or whatever else. Certain elements that they're certainly developing technology that they show up in our cars before they have more guidance with warning systems so there's no we're getting too close to the car ahead of us or whatever. But full driverless is still a ways off. Did that come even close? If not, come up afterwards and probably to make up some more stories. Anything else before we're going to wrap up here? Ma'am, and yes.
I have two questions, but they are related to each other. A couple of months ago, we had a Measure B and Measure C on the ballot. And don't you think that the
Thank you all for coming.
developers and the money in politics plays a big role in how our cities looks like or will look like?
I think money plays a role in a number of respects, and it's not just in terms of who gets elected. Certainly there are some things where that may factor in, the ones who have the more campaign donation. I think one of the things that really messes up planning in California, and I'm not certain, as long as you've got people involved, it's not necessarily ever going to be perfect. One of the challenges we have is that the way we finance our local governments is one that encourages cities not to have balanced growth. In other words, if you're a city council, let's say pick San Jose as an example, or a city, any city, you've got a piece of land here. You can either use it to build homes or a Home Depot. Most cities are going to opt for the Home Depot because that brings them sales tax revenue. It doesn't require that they have to provide many services to that. It's just the way we finance our local governments that almost, if you or I were elected to city council and the city manager's telling us we're going to have deficits unless we increase our tax revenue, we're going to start voting for some of that growth even if we've got elected to be, we aren't necessarily going to change our vote, but what I mean is there's a side of it we don't see. In other words, and part of that is you're not going to get elected to the city council if you aren't promising more and more of something. We're going to have more parks, we're going to have more policemen, well, that takes money. And unless you want to ask the voters to vote to increase their taxes, where do you get that? How do you keep your campaign promise? You allow another office building to go in, which will then generate a surplus of revenue to the city that helps you cover those costs. It doesn't necessarily lead to rational planning, and it isn't necessarily corrupt in the sense that some politicians are getting money under the table from developers. It's just that the way we finance our local governments in California, especially San Jose, suffered it in a big way when Prop 13 was passed. I don't mean to say Prop 13 has a lot of benefits to it, but prior to that time, it didn't matter that San Jose was the bedroom community for all of the jobs in North County. That people worked up there and lived down here. Because the way the cities could just adjust their tax rates, so they could, if they need more revenue to cover the cost of more greater population, they could change that. Prop 13 stopped that, so they then became dependent on sales tax revenue, which is why they're going to go for the Home Depot over the homes, because in terms of supporting a balanced community, they've got to go that direction. The incentives are for them to go in that direction. I'm sorry, that just makes the story more complicated because we've got an additional 50 different governments or 100 different governments. We've got the fact their financial incentives are not necessarily in the right place. But that's the reality of what we're dealing with. So I don't necessarily think that we have corrupt politicians in the sense that they can take development money for the campaign, and that may influence how they vote, but off the developers, they are going to support the ones who already are predisposed to support them anyway with the financial donation. It's way off what I normally talk about, so I'm disregarding, erase everything I just said. But there's one more hand back. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious. So it seems to be a very efficient way of using land, more efficiently than we've been doing, is to go subterranean, build basements, sub-basements, and so on. So for like mixed-use housing, where maybe you have the top floors for residential, and then the bottom floors, the basements, sub-basements, parking, or things that don't need a lot of sunlight, or
there's a lot of that already in terms of in some cases they call it podium parking, which means that it's not fully, the parking garage, but it's not fully underground, it's half underground as you're walking down the street. You can see it downtown San Jose, downtown Mountain View, a lot of places. They've done that sort of thing. A lot of those things are only pencil out economically if you're building something pretty big above it. So and the challenge is not that people are opposed to podium parking, they're opposed often to the density or the heights, and that's what you've got to overcome is that resistance to the change or to those densities if they're, we need to be more innovative in a lot of different ways.
I've seen in Japan, when I've traveled to Japan, I've seen where they go 3 stories down.
Right.
Yeah.
They have like big shopping complexes.
Exactly.
Underground.
Yeah, there are other cities. Chicago has a modified version of
They're
that.
expensive, though. I mean, land here seems pretty expensive. I'm willing to agree for that.
Yeah.
And also, will people, if I have a choice of shopping and dining at an outdoor restaurant sitting on the street, on a sidewalk versus in some cavern down below, I'm not certain, some of those things just may not pencil out in terms of their attractiveness. Parking you can always put underground.
They might. I mean, for suburban living, other people seem to prefer urban stuff. Everyone's different.
Well, yeah, but even urban means we'd like to have some greenery. We still want to have some contact with nature. That doesn't mean we live like earthworms or everybody, some places it may work. The housing part is probably the most problematic.
Oh, I understand. Almost being equal, fine. But if it's the difference between paying, say, $10,000 a month rent and $3,000 a month rent.
One other thing though that is quite common these days is for cities to talk about reducing their parking standards. In other words, if you're going to build this building, if the assumption has always been that 99% of those people are going to have cars and they're going to drive everywhere. But if you're building that same building right near a transit center, maybe they aren't, and maybe that all those parking spaces, whether they're occupied or not, are costing money. If you want to reduce the price of the housing, you don't require them to provide that much parking. Or no parking at all.
Or charge for the parking.
Or charge for the parking in some cases. There's a group in Palo Alto, I think it is, has been doing surveys recently. They go around and check parking garages and apartment complexes and say, this was built according to the city standards. Let's go at night and they'll check and see how many of those spaces are occupied. And they found that even that a lot of them are not occupied, which basically means that the developer had to put money into that, and the home builders, the home buyers had to pay for that parking that's not being used for anything. So there's a strong movement in the face of opposition from neighborhoods. Obviously, people are fearful that, well, if you reduce the parking standard for that new development, they're going to park in front of my house instead, that kind of thing. But I think there are the challenge is that there are rational solutions and then there are political solutions. There are many things that make eminent good sense, and I'm sure we all probably have some great ideas and suggestions how we can make things better. The question is, can you get them through the political process? Can you get your neighbors to agree to them? Can you get the developers to build them, will pencil out? It's complicated, but we've got to have hope that we can make a change, we can make a difference. It's our obligation, I think, to do that. We weren't put here just to look out for ourselves. We were here for a bigger purpose that most of us would probably agree to. What that is different, but we've got big challenges. We've got the resources. So if we just get our imagination, get people together talking about these questions, how would you create? If you were going to create an urban village somewhere here in South San Jose, where would you put it?
Underground.
What would you want underground?
Wherever the Costco is, wherever the Costco, then we got to buy it here.
Okay. Oh, you've had some excellent questions, some that I've not thought about before, and obviously not answered before because my answers were pretty inept, but whatever. Great to have you all here this evening. Thank you, and congratulations to your association and what you've been doing to serve your community.
Thanks, John. Appreciate you coming out. That was pretty interesting.
And the city council turned us a warm-up match. How cool was that?
I'd like to invite all of you to maybe our next meeting on November 15th, same place. We're not sure if your name's on that email list, maybe we can let you know. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, nothing else, and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.